Well, good evening, everyone. It is September the 15th, 2015. I'm Wes Fryer, and I'm joined by Melanie Hemry. I am so excited that we're going to get to have this conversation tonight for Write Well, Sell Well. This is the third webinar in a series that we are doing, and we're changing our format a little bit just as far as kind of where we are. We got some lights here. It's going to be a little bit brighter. And we want to just jump right in. And as we have folks come online live, we will ask you for your questions that you'd like to share. So Melanie, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your life as an author, because you, as well as the other founders of Write Well, Sell Well, I'm in awe of your writing expertise and experiences. And so how did you come to writing, and how do you describe yourself now as a professional author?
Well, I took a circuitous route. I'm a registered nurse, and I worked almost 20 years at Baptist Hospital, and I was a supervisor of the coronary care unit, assistant clinical supervisor of the intensive care tower for many years. And then I resigned, did everything backwards, adopted my children, and went back to school to learn to write, and started my second career. And it's been fun. I've been at it 29 years, and I have written a total of 54 books, 6 under my own name, and the rest I've ghostwritten. And I write for Guidepost. I won the Guidepost writing contest in 1988. I'd actually been writing for them since 1986. And I have other magazines that I write for regularly. And in addition to that, Renee Gutteridge and I are just writing our first documentary together.
Wow, that is amazing. So you didn't know from childhood or anything that I was going to be a writer. When did the writing bug? I'm off script already.
That's all right.
When did the writing bug hit you? How did you know you wanted to make this career jump and this change?
7th grade, I was at the skating rink, and there was a skating instructor who was a college student, and he told me he was going to go to school and learn to be a writer and write books. And I was stunned, speechless, because I was an avid reader, and I thought, somebody writes those books. How cool would that be? So I decided in 7th grade that that's what I wanted to do. No, we were very poor. Nobody in my family had ever been to college. So I got a job in high school as a nursing assistant. So naive, I thought I could save enough money to go to college. I couldn't, but the hospital offered me a scholarship in nursing. Wow. And I took it.
Wow. So you did know from a young age that writing was your destiny, but you, like you said, you took kind of a circuitous route to get there. All right. Well, we have talked to a lot of beginning writers who are very discouraged about breaking into the published industry, and they feel like giving up. You have some good news for them.
I have a lot of good news for them. What I want to do tonight is debunk some of the myths about how hard it is to get published. Now, I'm going to admit that there are people I could name right now who started their writing career the same time I did that have never been published and gave up. But that's not my story. My story is actually, I resigned from my nursing career in December of one year, started writing and studying the craft in January. And that first year, I won a writing contest. I was published in the Oklahoma Nurse, the American Journal of Nursing, and made my first sale to Guidepost.
Wow.
So what I want to talk about this evening is that it's not just luck that I made it and they didn't.
And that's a consistent theme that we hear a lot of folks talk about in different career fields, that there's this myth of, suddenly you were touched by a magic wand and suddenly your career laid out. I mean, lots of hard work, lots of persistence, and lots of consistent effort. Right.
Well, I was honored to be at a national editor's office of a national magazine. And if you've ever been at an editor's desk, it's like the abyss. Some editors call their desk the abyss. It's stacked so high of manuscripts, you don't know how you can cope. And so I was in this one editor's office, and he just said, how through all of this did my manuscript make it to the top? And he said, good question. Take a stack of those and sit over there and look through them. Okay, so I did. And here's what very few people in the industry know or understand or tell you. but they were horrible. They were beyond awful. It was excruciating to read them. And I turned to the editor and I said, are they all like this? And he said, most of them are. And so I was just so shocked about that, because I couldn't imagine, how they get through all of that. And so what I want you to know is that while there's a lot of competition out there in terms of volume, if you're watching this webinar tonight, you've already shot way above the crowd, because it shows that you're so interested in honing your craft and learning this business that you're exactly the kind of person the industry needs.
Well, let's go back to those people who did start their careers when you did and their manuscripts didn't get published. What was it that differentiated your writing and got you the contract?
That's a good question. The difference is that Cherry Fuller and I started our writing career together studying under Catherine Fanning. Catherine was a fabulous writer and speaker. She taught in national writing conferences all over the country. And she was selling things right and left. And so we got in there, and here's what people don't understand. There's a lot of places you can go to learn to write. You can go to a community college to learn to write. You can go to university to learn to write. You can go to a critique group to learn to write. But there's very few places you can learn to sell. There's very few places you can learn how the industry works and how you're supposed to navigate your way through it. So because Cherry and I studied under an author who was very well established in selling, she taught us how to do that. And so every other person that I can name to you that started their writing career when I didn't do that.
So if we think about our Write Well, Sell Well conference, it's the sell well part that these other folks didn't get mentored in.
Didn't get it.
Well, in fact, I want to do this first. You have co-founded a conference called Write Well, Sell Well.
Yes.
And we're coming up in October to our third conference.
Yes.
Why did you found the conference, and why should people who are watching, if they're not already planning to attend, come?
Well, one of the things that Catherine Fanning taught us was that you've got to invest in your education. You've got to invest in your career. So we were ordered, not suggested, to go to every writers conference that we could get to. If it was in the state, we were going. Like one time there was going to be a conference somewhere in the state on writing sci-fi. I don't like sci-fi. I told Catherine, I don't like sci-fi. And she said, you will learn something. And I did. And so so you invest in yourself as you go. And, So the reason that we started this conference is because people like Catherine have retired now, and we're looking around, and we felt like somebody needed to step up and help the next generation.
You're paying it forward.
We're paying it forward.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Absolutely. And I will say, as someone who's navigated writing and publishing, it is so inspiring to be around a group of authors and published writers, but also aspiring writers, and to have so many different opportunities to get windows into different aspects of the whole industry, because there's so many different pieces. I mean, I've learned from you all that even if you are traditionally published, you still have to promote yourself.
That's right.
You still have to have a platform. You still have to, be involved with social media and have ways of getting the word out. And anyway, it's a great catalyst for me to move my own writing forward. And it really, it allows me to step out of my box for maybe the education and technology groups that I tend to be with. And I think we learn so much through mixing, right?
We do.
When we mix with other folks who are walking on a different path, but
Right.
Still writing and still passionate about sharing a message and communicating and getting a story
And
out.
this is the way it works. As writers, we're your tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And we're your tribe. If you're on this webinar, we're your tribe. And so it feels like I'm finally in my place when you hang around with your tribe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let me ask you about people out there who don't have published authors leading critique groups, because, we heard, if you haven't seen our previous webinars, critique groups were talked about. It's vital, to be able to get together. So how could folks get help if they don't know of these critique groups that they could join?
And there's a lot of people in situations like that. But number one, my first piece of advice is go to every writers conference you can go to, even if it's sci-fi. Go. You will learn something. And then my second thing is, if it's at all financially feasible, go to writers intensives.
And what is that? I've learned about that through our work, but for people who don't know, what's a writer intensive?
It's where a group of professional writers take a small group of students to work intensely on something they need to have help with getting over the hump. Okay, whether it's an article or a book or something like that. But for day-to-day help, this is what most people don't understand. There are a lot of wonderful editors, and hire an editor, and you can email your work to her or him, and they'll critique it, and you put a check in snail mail. After Catherine Fanning taught me to write for Guidepost, and after I had won the Guidepost contest in 1988, for the next 3 years, I hired her to line edit everything I sent to Guidepost, because I knew I still needed help. And so, a good editor, and you can ask to any published author and ask around and get names of good editors, because there's a lot, but they can do a conceptual edit, maybe on a book. They can do a line editing, or they can do a copy edit. And usually they can look at your material and tell you what you need.
I need to tell you, you're speaking directly to me as a writer.
Okay.
In fact, Renee did last time, because she's like, and it can't be your mom.
That's right.
Yes, I've had my mother edit my stuff. How do we know how much to pay? Is that something that websites will have listed, where editors will kind of sort of put out their shingle and say what their rate is? Or
most of the time, for like a copy edit or a line edit, it's so much per page. For a conceptual edit, they may give you a project number.
Okay.
But it's not unreasonable at all.
Okay. Well, good. Well, one of the things I'm hearing you say is a key to success is to stay teachable. What does that mean to you? And am I hearing you right?
That's exactly right. I've been doing this for 29 years, and I've had a great deal of success. And I still I not only co-host Write Well, Sell Well, I still attend other writers' conferences. I still go and buy books on the craft. I'm studying the craft all the time. I mean, for 10 years, every year, I drove to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and attended the Santa Fe Screenwriting Conference. That usually cost me over $1,000.
Wow.
Now, ask me if that was tough. It was. My kids were growing up. It was very hard to do it. There was a year or two, I put it on a credit card, and then I typed my little fingers to the bone to pay off the credit card. But if you're not going to invest in your career and in yourself, who's going to do it for you? And then the other thing about staying teachable is, one year, my good friend, Gina Linus, and I went to a writers conference. Now, Gina and I are both ghostwriters. And at that time together, we'd probably ghosted at least 60 books. And a ghosting, for those that you don't know, is I write it for somebody else under their name usually. But Gina had already had one of her ghosted books on the New York Times bestseller list. So at this conference, there was a lecture on ghostwriting, and the woman who taught it had ghosted 5 books. Okay, this is what being teachable means. We didn't go in and go, oh, well, guess how many books I've written? I've ghosted. No, we zipped our lips. We sat down, took out our pen and pencil, took notes on everything that she said. And at the end, we looked at each other and go, I got some good tips out of that. That was great. That's staying teachable, because, it doesn't matter how long you're at this. If you start getting puffed up about yourself, things not going to go well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what would you say is the number one thing you learned from Catherine Fanning that caused your manuscripts to go to the top?
How to study the market. I mean, let's face it. What you need to do is meet a felt and real need for that editor. Well, how are you going to know that unless you know what that editor wants? So one of the things that we were required to do in Catherine Fanning's class is every week we had to have had something written and bring it to class. But before we could share what we had written, we had to say, okay, I targeted my market for this publication. They always do third person or first person, 1,500 words or 2,000 words, whatever the requirements were. Let's say if you're going to write about collecting old crockery, there's tons of magazines. You got to figure out which one you're going to target and give that editor what they need. And so one of the things Catherine had done, and I do for my writing students now, is you probably can't see this. It looks like a blank piece of paper, but it's a form I made out for magazine study guide. You can go to the library. Let's say you want to do something on diet and exercise for Women's Today. You want to look at the last 6 months and make sure you're not going to repeat something they've already had published. That's going to keep you from getting rejected right away. And then you're going to look at what features they do. Is it first person? Is it third person? You count the words so you'll know how many words the editor's looking for. Do they have sidebars? Are they bullets? Do they have subquoting headings? Do they have pull quotes? Mm-hmm. And so I have all of this.
All the formatting stuff that's going to let them know you've done your homework, right, if you're aligning to what they
So publish. If you want a copy of this, email us at writewellsellwell@gmail.com and we'll email you an electronic copy, and you can just print off as many as you want to do. And then the other thing is, let's say you're going to do a book, the same thing. You want to study the market to find out who is looking for your type of subject. And so one of the things I recommend is I brought it. This is the 2016 Writer's Market Guide. And for magazines and book publishers, you can go in here and read. They'll tell you what they're looking for. Sometimes they'll say what they don't want, and they'll give you the address to send it to, either snail mail or email, and the name of the acquisitions editor. Now, one of the things Catherine taught us, which I'm going to tell you, is before you send something to that editor, you're going to call the magazine or publisher and say, is Celeste McCauley still the editor? And make sure you know how to spell her name right, because that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
You want to make sure they're still there and get the right name. Yeah. And then you track who all you sent.
You're personalizing it. You're doing your research, but then you're personally targeting an individual, not just a publication.
So if you're looking for a book publisher, this will tell you, do they want a query letter? Do they want a book proposal? How many sample chapters do they want to see? And so you can make a list of all the publishers that might be right for your book. And then when you get ready to submit, you've done your homework, and you can actually give the editor, you have a better shot because you're targeting your own market.
Right, right. I want to mention, because we didn't say this earlier, that we are live and this is interactive. And so you can post some questions if you'd like to for Melanie. In the upper left corner, I think, of your window, you'll see a button that will let you post a question, and we'll see it appear here in our Google Hangout. And we would love to answer questions if you'd like to post and share some of those. How did you find out about the Writer's Market Guide? Was that something that you learned about from Catherine? Okay.
But you're not going to learn that from somebody that's not a published author who's submitting regularly.
Right, right. Okay. So how big of a problem do you think it is when folks fail to study their markets? Is that a common error?
I think it's the number one problem why people do not get accepted. Is
that because folks just they just think I'm going to do my own thing, or that maybe it's just that they're not coached. They haven't been coached.
They don't know they need to do it.
Okay.
But for instance, one of the magazines I write for is Guidepost. Guidepost is looking for a story, not an article. They want about 1,600 words written in short story format from one character's point of view, with a problem that worsens until the very end, where you have a black moment, and then there's a turnaround and one spiritual takeaway. It's a formula. That's what they want, and it always works. But I was in New York City working with my editors one day, and he said, let's just look at what I get for fun, and brought me a big stack of manuscripts to look for. I saw a lot of essays. I saw a lot of teachings. I saw some 3-point sermons, and I saw one article written about an angel.
In the stack for guideposts?
I saw one article written about an angel and described vivid male nudity. So I was stunned because not only was this horribly disrespectful and a huge waste of time, it showed that not only had they not studied the market, I don't think they'd read the magazine.
Yeah, right.
That's the kind of competition you're up against.
Wow. Well, give us another example of how viewers can get their manuscript out of the abyss and on the editor's desk and in print.
Well, I'd say the second biggest thing is when you write, to learn not to tell what you're saying, but to show what you're saying. Because a sign of a really good writer and what's going to get your manuscript to the top of the pile is showing and not telling. So what do I mean by that? When you show, you're going to basically paint a word picture. You're going to involve all the senses, the smell, the sight, and the sound, and the touch. And you're going to use vivid descriptive detail. Just to give you an example, early in my career, I interviewed Delta Rawls, who couldn't swim, and she was swept away in a flood, and she hung in a tree with snakes for 3 days. Okay, when the boat came to get her, they wrapped her in a yellow blanket. In your mind, did you see that absolutely pop the color? I mean, I actually didn't use the yellow in the story. I didn't need it, but that's an example of how using the senses can make something come alive that was black and white in your mind when I told you. And then all of a sudden it popped when I told you it was a yellow blanket. Okay. So let me give you an example of this. So this is an example that I use when I teach some of my classes. This is telling. Paul was so sad when his puppy got hit by the car. Okay. Now, showing. Happy wove his way between Paul's legs and dashed out the door as fast as his furry white paws could run. Paul froze at the sound of squealing brakes, a sickening thump, and a terrified high-pitched howl. Paul dropped to his knees beside the twisted, motionless puppy with a sob.
Wow.
Okay. That's the difference between showing and telling. And if you're telling what you want the people to know, then you're going to go to the bottomless slush pile.
This makes me think of our conference and about the way I think our conference, I say our.
It is our.
A small part of this.
You're a part of that.
It equips,
Yes.
right? It's not just about going to a session to hear folks. I mean, it is hearing about ideas, but it's also about going to workshops and getting equipped to do that kind of writing.
Right.
So it's a mix of different sessions. There's keynotes, there are shorter breakouts, but then there's also these longer workshops which are focused on skills and building those. Can you give us another example of strong writing? That definitely was a great one.
Okay, I'm going to give you another one, and this is one that a lot of people don't recognize or even know, is that different colleges and writing studies have different outlooks on adverbs. Now, if you've been out of school for a long time, an adverb is a word ending in ly.
I could sing the Schoolhouse Rock.
Could you?
Well, I won't, but I could.
So, happily, angrily, softly, fastly, speedily, the ly words. Now, there are a lot of college writing programs that treat an adverb just like any other word that you write from. And then there's another side of other schools of thought that believe you should never, ever use an adverb.
Really?
Right. Why? Because is the word happily, is it showing or is it telling?
I think it's probably showing.
No.
No?
It's telling. You're telling them that they were happy.
Oh.
You're telling them they were angry.
Okay.
You're telling them they were going fast.
Rather than drawing the picture that causes them to conclude.
So the schools that train the writers not to use adverbs are rabid about it. I was at a national writing conference before a huge audience. One of the top editors in the nation stopped her speech and said, by the way, When I get a manuscript with an editor, with an adverb in it, I throw it in the trash and I put your name on a list of writers that I will not work with.
Wow.
Because she said, I'm too busy to work with a lazy writer.
Wow.
And if you're too lazy to show me instead of telling me, I don't have time for you.
Wow. So adverbs are really when you're trying to circumvent the process and just tell people what they're supposed to think.
Well,
versus elaboration.
That's that train of thought. Now, I want to go on to say Edward Grennan, who is the editor-in-chief at Guidepost, was brought up in one of the schools of thought that adverbs are fine. And in his fabulous book, he used them liberally. But then again, I was at a writers' conference, and one of the top editors of children's work said this before a big crowd. She said, it infuriates me when you send me manuscripts with an adverb in it. Because what are you thinking? It's okay to be lazy if you're writing for children? She said, I will not work with a writer. So what I'm saying to you is that think carefully if you're a new writer. Now, if you're Stephen King's famous quote about adverbs is, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Now,
just a little strong.
Yeah. Now, I will say this. I've seen adverbs in his work. I don't know, when you get to be Stephen King, you can write any way you want to. But in addition to that, I never write with adverbs because Catherine's taught us if you see an adverb, kill it. But I have wonderful editors who edit adverbs into my work. So when you see an adverb in my work, you know it's edited in. But I want to give you an example of what this looks like. This is another example that I use in some of my writing students. And
while you're finding that example, remember, if you'd like to post a question, feel free to do that. We are just about halfway through our time, and we will definitely have time to respond to some questions. So feel free to post those, and we will get to those as we can.
Okay, so here is an adverb. Lisa looked sorrowfully at her grandmother's grave. Okay, now is that telling or showing?
That would
be
telling.
So to rewrite that, this is what I wanted to do, was not say she was sad ever. I wanted to show that with words that set that mood. So this is the way I rewrote it. Clouds the color of gunmetal gray shrouded the morning as Lisa turned for one last look at her mother's grave, her eyes as stark as a stone cold marker. Okay. So what I did is I didn't ever say she was sad.
Yeah.
But when you use gunmetal gray and stone cold marker and words like stark, you are setting the mood and you are showing it without having to say it. So what does this mean to you as a beginning writer? This is what I firmly believe, and not everybody teaches this. You don't know which editor is going to read your work. It may be somebody that loves adverbs and goes, oh man, if this had a few more adverbs, we could really make it sing. And it might be somebody that goes, they're lazy and I'm not going to work with them. You don't know. So my question is to you, do you want to play Russian roulette with your career? Because honestly, most people don't know this, that there's two philosophies on adverbs. So I suggest for beginning writers that you just don't do it, because you don't know until you develop your own career and relationship with editors that you know.
Do you think this goes for fiction as well as nonfiction, for all kinds of writing? Or
yeah, because you don't know what school of thought that editor was trained in, whether it was fiction or nonfiction.
Do you think more than half of the editors you've worked with and talked with are in that camp of no adverbs? I mean, is that the majority position of editors, do you think? Or is it even possible to make that kind of?
I don't really know, but I would say a best guess would be probably 50-50, but it all just depends. Like if you have an editor-in-chief that was trained up that adverbs are good, then every editor in that magazine staff is going to let you use adverbs.
Okay.
If you have somebody in charge of that publishing house that thinks they're a sign of a lazy writer, then nobody, regardless of how they we're trained is going to get away
So that's
with
part
it.
of the culture of the entire organization. It's
Right.
going to permeate the whole
Right.
thing. So, all right. Well, we've got more time. Give us another tip for a long, successful writing career.
Okay, so you want to make your editor happy. I've worked with a lot of editors, and mostly they're swamped and stressed. And what you want to do is take some of that burden off of them so they could just sigh in relief. And the last thing they need is a needy writer who is interrupting them in the middle of the day with trivial things or with just needing a pat on the back. You've got to be more professional than that. So I made a list of some things that I think would help you make your editors happy. First of all, you need to know what they're looking for. You need to understand their market.
Back to that homework point.
Back to that homework point, and know that this is the way he or she likes it, and that's the way you're going to give it to them. Don't be cute. Don't think, well, I have a better idea. Don't do it. They know what they need, and they're formatting, like if it's on a magazine, it's going to be set on how much space they're going to have and what they want to be told in it. So if you want to be cute and have a better idea, I just don't recommend it. So here's what I do recommend. Give them what they want, the way they want it, when they want it. And you wouldn't believe how something like that can boost you up over the crowd. Meet your deadlines. Meet them. It doesn't matter if you're like me, and when my kids both had chicken pox and I had deadlines, I stayed up all night when I had to getting them done. Meet your deadlines. Be responsible for that. I've always endeavored to meet my deadlines, but my good friend Gina Lennis, who is also a mentor of mine, told me a few years ago, I didn't know this. She said, "Oh, I never meet my deadlines." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I endeavor to always, whether it's a magazine article or book, get it to them ahead of schedule."
Yeah.
She said, "If I get it to them on schedule, I consider myself late."
Wow.
Well, can you imagine the relief an editor feels when he's running a publishing company or going to have to get a book in print or a magazine in print, and somebody gets it to them ahead of schedule? Well, they just went to the top of their list right there. And then the other thing is, I advise you that don't contact them unless you need to. If you have to ask something, send it by email if you can. But if you have a question and you have to call in, one of my editors says, call me middle afternoon when I have my postprandial slump, and I'm not making good sense. But if you have to call them, be brief, be concise, and don't take up their time unnecessarily.
Well, it's kind of like text messaging now. I mean, it can be just much more thoughtful in terms of your time to be able to handle that when you're ready for it. A phone call has more immediacy. You got to take it now. An email, you're giving them options and choices.
Right.
So it's kind of a more, if it's not an absolute demanding thing, you're just being more respectful of their time by communicating with them.
Would you say text message to me again after I finish this thought?
Sure.
Okay. Because you made me think of something else.
Okay.
So here's what you want to be. You want to be the person that the editor thinks of when all of a sudden they realize that what they had planned for the next issue of the magazine is not going to work. And they're going to have to pull their major story. And they are in a tizzy about what to do to get a new article in there and get it fast. And when they think your name, they go, "Oh, she'll do it. It'll be perfect. She'll get it to me ahead of schedule.
It might even be early."
It might even be early. Yeah. And they know they can trust you. That's the person you want to be to that editor. When you can do those things and hone your craft and write, there's a lot of editors that are willing to work with you on your craft if you got the business side of it down. Guidepost is one of those. There's a lot of magazines that you can't just send an article. You have to have an invitation to write for them. But Guidepost will read everything that comes in. And if they have somebody that they think has the potential but it's not there, they'll try to work with them.
Okay. Text message.
Text message. I'm so glad you said that, because text messages and social media have totally changed the way we write. I will say this, before even this change in social media, I would say that the prevalence of people with dyslexia and reading disabilities and people that are coming off of drugs and that type of thing changed it in that you started wanting to see a lot shorter sentences and a lot of white space on the page. And then when social media came along, it changed it even more drastically. We're talking, if you will read a lot of national magazines now, and books and magazines, very short thoughts, very short paragraphs, and a lot of white on the page. The white on the page is because it gives the eye a rest and they can keep reading. And particularly for those readers who are not at the top of the bell curve. And so I've seen some people that write articles and put out magazines that they're trying to get a lot in. And so what they do is they just put it all the way to the margins almost in little print with very, and what they're doing is cutting out all of their readers except the very top of the bell curve. Wow. The very best readers, and they're going to lose everybody else because their eye's going to be too tired. It's going to be too hard for them to read. So I always, one of my editors quite a few years ago when social media started getting so big, called me and said, I want you to pay attention to how I'm editing your work because we're starting to shorten sentences. And I've always been sort of fast and quick, but she said, no, we need more than that. Yeah. So I started doing that. And so I tend to write short. I tend to write so short that one of my editors says, yeah, I put a little back into that paragraph.
So long, complex sentences, that's kind of like adverbs, just
out.
Send them out.
Out.
Because I've heard that like USA Today, and maybe this goes for lots of publications, are written sort of for a 6th grade reading level that, if like in Word, you can do that analysis thing where it'll, tell you a reading level. But that's the target market is not to.
Yeah, 5th to 7th. So 6 is the thing to do. But my most recent article I did for Guidepost is going to be out in the November issue. And when I got back their revisions, and I write short, they shortened those sentences. Some of the sentences were like 3 words, 4 words, like that. So pay attention. And the days of a long sentence and a semicolon followed by another long part of the sentence. Yeah, every now and then you might be able to get away with that, but those days are pretty much over.
I'm feeling again so convicted about this because I know that I'm often guilty of writing long sentences and thinking about, our purpose. Our purpose is to communicate to our audience. It's to, it is to be published and be read, but to be understood. And this is huge, right? This is huge, even whatever our backgrounds are, recognizing changing times and then just also changing expectations.
Well, one of the things that most of the schools of writing teach is to think of your reader, have one person in mind. So if you tend to write long, complicated sentences, think of somebody that's severely dyslexic or learning disabled, that struggled to learn to read at a grade level. Let that be your person and think about helping them to be able to read this without straining.
And I think Cherry talked about that in her webinar, that picturing that person, picturing your audience can really be a huge tool to get you to write the story you need to write. And I really hadn't made that connection. I sort of thought of audience in more general terms, like they're going to be, this age or whatever. But if you can pick a specific person and personalize it, then that can really affect the way that you write.
Right.
That's great. Well, talk a little bit about learning to tell a true story well. Would you say that's one of your passions as a writer, is retelling true stories?
It is. Everybody loves good fiction, but when you think of fiction versus nonfiction, most of us think nonfiction is boring, and it shouldn't be. But I teach a writer's critique group, and it was the first year we were doing it, and I was frustrated that my class wasn't progressing the way that I thought they should. And so I really started thinking a lot about what can I do to help them over the hump. And the answer that came to me was teach them to write a true story well. And so I called Gina Lennis, who's my mentor, and I said, what do you think about this? And she said, well, my first thought was teach them to write a story well. And Gina said, no, teach them to write a true story well. Because if you
what's the difference? I mean, why say true story?
Okay, so in a story format,
I'll fix my hair before it started.
Always there is a problem, and the problem is going to get worse and worse and worse,
right?
Until it's resolved at the end of the story. Once the problems are solved, you don't have a story.
Story arc,
right? And so with that in mind, where was I going?
We were going to the difference between true story and story.
Okay,
Why say true story?
Let's say you're writing a short story and it's fiction, and you need to kick the tension up. Well, you can have it be a rainstorm, and you can decide that there is a branch scratching the window. You can have the knob turn on the kitchen door. There's 100 things you can just make up and kick your tension up.
Right.
You can't do that when you're telling a true story. You have to stick to the facts, and it takes more skill.
Sort of like you're working with a smaller base,
and
so you have to work within that realm of facts.
And the truth of the matter, it's pretty easy to learn to write exposition, but this is what Gina and I both believe, that whether you're going to write fiction or nonfiction, if you can learn to tell a true story well, you will be able to write your ticket as a writer. As a matter of fact, my class, some of whom are watching right now, when I started making them write true stories, they were sort of kicking against that a little bit. But I think that if they were here, they would all tell you that we've been making sales.
You mentioned tension, and that's something else that I think you excel at. How have you learned to build tension, maintain tension? How does that?
Well, I think that number one, I started my first sales. One of my first sales was to Guidepost in 1986, and I've been writing for them ever since. And one of the things that in telling a good story well, which is what they're the masters of telling true stories, is that you must hold the tension till the end. And so,
and really, isn't that what a good storyteller does too? If you're telling it, because that's what keeps you, on the edge.
And this is what I've seen with a lot of beginning writers, is that let's say the tension is like a rubber band. It starts here, and in the story, it goes like this. You're just stretching it, and it's going up. And the more you stretch it and the higher it gets, the more tension you feel. And then somebody that's a beginning writer in the middle of it feels sorry for the reader and they drop it. It ruins the story right there. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is be able to take that tension and hold the tension. Let's say that they're right here and something really fabulous happens in their life. That's not the place to tell it. You got to pick and choose so that you're going to actually pull it like a rubber band all the way up like this and hold it to the end of the story. And then if you're writing a short story in a true format or otherwise, then once you get to the blackest moment, that rubber band is stretched as far as it can go, then you have your turnaround. And within 2 to 3 paragraphs, you're out. You're done.
Okay.
It's over.
So like the punchline, you're holding it out for the very end, because if you reveal that too soon,
I was talking to a writer recently, and not recently, this was a long time ago. I was editing something for someone, and right in the middle of the story, the tension dropped. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "I felt so sorry for the reader."
Oh, geez.
But people don't understand this about tension and about story problem. If you think of, say, a happy movie like The Sound of Music, okay, singing and children and dancing and all of that. Okay, so story problem is Maria isn't doing so well at the Abbey. Maria gets thrown in with the whole group of kids and a man with a whistle. Things are not going well. They keep going downhill. Okay. Maria falls in love with the man with the whistle and wants to take the whistle away from man. Okay. But man's engaged to somebody else. I mean, the problems just keep going on and going on. And in the backdrop of all this, the Nazis are coming.
Right.
You know, they're about to lose their lives possibly and everything they own. You know, so even what I'm saying is, even in a movie that can be as charming as The Sound of Music, don't miss the fact that they had the tension going up the whole time.
Right.
And they didn't let it go until they got over the top of that mountain.
That's
that's
great.
what we've got to do as writers.
That's great. That's great. Well, I've heard you say criticism is gold. Talk a little bit about criticism, and I want to talk also about failure a little bit. Renee had talked about that quite a bit, but how do you address criticism? How do you coach writers to look at criticism? Okay,
so this is, I'm going to have to give credit where it belongs with Catherine Fanning, because she explained this to us from the very beginning. Is you're new at this, and what you need to know is what you're doing wrong and how to fix it. And Mama ain't gonna tell you. She's not. Your best friend's not gonna tell you, even if they know. And most of the time they don't know. Okay. And so you need somebody to really, it's like iron sharpening iron, to come in and be honest and tell you what you're doing well and then what you need to work on. And so Catherine was saying, and it's still even more true today, let's say an editor's really busy. And I actually had this happen to me once. I had a book submitted to a publisher, a big national publisher, and they held it in the marketing committee for 8 months while I travailed about what they were going to do with it. And when they decided not to publish it, he said, "You're one of the best writers we've ever come across, but we don't know how to market this book. It doesn't fit a regular genre. And we have struggled and struggled. And so you've got to find a publisher that knows how to market your book."
Wow.
Okay. But whether it's that or it's your adverbs or the structure's all wrong, it's like gold if they take the time out of their busy schedule to either tell you by phone or send you an email and say, here's the things, here's why we're not going to take this. But what happens a lot of time, Wes, is that an editor will take their time to give this fabulous gift to a writer, and they get a horrible, mean, nasty phone call, a mean, nasty letter, to their editor. And so these editors get so burned that they stop telling.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about teachability, right?
You've got to stay
remembering
teachable.
to stay teachable, because we never know where we're going to get a nugget of wisdom. And if you're open to that, you just may find that all along the road of, your journey.
And one of the ways that you can get sometimes some great criticism is to submit to writing contests. Not always, but a lot of times the people who judge the contest will make notes. And so the way that we were taught, Cherry and I were taught, and probably Renee too, is when somebody takes the time to critique your work, feel like and know and recognize that they just gave you a gift worth pure gold.
Yeah. Well, hey, Lisa Logue has just posted a question here.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
And she says, "Hello, Melanie. Tell us a bit about rejection. Do you know anything about rejection? Have you experienced that?"
We have all had our experience. I think I said early on that I made several sales to different magazines the first year that I was struggling. I don't even know how many rejections I got. It's like childbirth. You tend to forget the rejections and just remember the happy part. But over the years, there have been some. And the thing I would say is that you cannot let that define you. I mean, that's part of this business. There's no way around it. But, I've known people honestly, who took all their rejection letters and papered a wall. Don't do that. Throw those suckers out.
Yeah.
You want to keep the good things. I got a postcard from my editor about an article I'd done years ago, the only article I'd done about myself for Guidepost. And he said, you made that sing. Okay, I framed it and hung it in my house. Those are the things you want to remember.
Well, I said this, I think, during Renee's webinar, but I heard a few years ago from a cultural anthropologist that our identities are not just what we project out, but it's much more what's reflected back to us. So to your point about don't wallpaper your room with rejection letters, that's what you're going to be reflecting back to yourself and surrounding yourself with. So by framing that letter where they said you made it sing, you know, you are choosing to reflect back. You're putting a mirror up in your house to say you have what it takes. You can do this, you know, to maintain that, you know, intestinal, I don't know if it's fortitude or spirit, but to have, because isn't that vital? I mean, as our identities can be fragile things when we're in environments where negativity and you know, poison, not literal, but it really can take its toll on us. So what you're saying is make sure you're putting things around yourself that build you up and remind you of who you are, that you are a writer and you're capable.
And I want to say something else. Like Lisa Logue asked this question. Lisa's one of my writing students. Okay. Now, so Lisa, I want to address this. The rejections you've gotten are not because your writing wasn't good enough. Your subjects just didn't fit for what they were looking for right then. And that's the way it often is. If your writing wasn't good enough, I wouldn't let you send it. You know, but the truth is that sometimes, well, let me give you an example. I've been so blessed with my writing career that when you win the Guidepost contest, like I did in 1988, you spend a week in New York, you know, being spoon-fed by the best editors in the country. And then after that, if you're submitting regularly and if you're invited every other year, they have a contest just for the winners of the big contest.
Wow.
Okay. And so I was so blessed that for years, I mean, I won every one I submitted to. And then one year I found this great story. I knew it was a Guidepost story. This little woman, she was a widow down in Oklahoma City, and she got kidnapped and tied up and thrown in the trunk of a car and all this stuff. And it had lots of great drama, and it had a great spiritual takeaway. Her inner journey, remind me of Inner and Outer Journey if we have time. Her inner journey was as important as her outer journey. And I mean, I no more sent that in than I got a rejection letter back. And they said, Melanie, we've already got a story like this. And I thought, really? A widow is kidnapped, hogtied, and put in the back of a car? Really? Well, in the next few months, I was reading Guidepost magazine, and there it was. It was in one of the, I think it was in North Carolina. A woman was a violin teacher at a university, had been giving a lesson late at night, was going to her car, got kidnapped, got hogtied, duct taped her mouth, and thrown off a bridge into the river. Okay, they had already bought my story, only theirs was better. So a lot of time, I mean, like
that person had shopped their story before to someone else.
Yeah,
is that what happened?
Guidepost had already bought it.
Oh.
So what you don't want to, they're not going to buy something like what they've got, what they've just printed or they're about to print.
And you don't have control over that.
You don't know. It has nothing to do with the way it was written.
Right.
None whatsoever.
Right, right. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. Do you want to talk about Inner and Outer Journey? And then I want to talk a little bit about the conference, to talk a little bit about one-on-ones
on Inner and Outer Journey, you know, a lot of people know when you're writing a novel that it's not just about the action. To really flesh that out, you need to tell the inner journey. But what a lot of people don't know, when you're writing true short stories, like for Guidepost, if you have a fabulous drama and there isn't a change in inner journey, change in that character, in the character arc from the beginning to the end, it's not going to work.
Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about the conference, and then I think we're going to wrap up. If anyone would like to submit some questions, thanks, Lisa, for submitting that. We would be happy to field those questions. the format of the conference, and this is going to be a 2-day conference this year instead of just, we started 1 day and 1.5. There's one-on-ones. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how people can think about using that as a real tool to improve their
For instance,
writing?
say that you want to write a true story for Guidepost or some other magazine, and you have questions about why you're not making it. Sign up, bring one of them, sign up with a 15-minute one-on-one with me, and let me help you try to figure out where you need to go with that. Or let's say you're writing a novel and you've got trouble with the plot. Sign up with Renee and ask her, where do you think I'm going wrong here? So these are 15-minute consultations where you can choose the speaker, the author that you feel like would best help you where you're stuck, and we want to try to get you unstuck.
How is that one-on-one, or how should people approach that one-on-one differently than, say, if they're going to hire, an editor, like you were saying?
Well, in 15 minutes, we don't have time to do a lot in it, But if you can come in and say, well, here is what I think I'm having trouble with, and it's a short thing, we can look at it. Or you can come in and say, here's the plot that I'm working with, but I'm stuck. What do you think? Or, here's a sample of a few paragraphs of my writing. How can I improve it? Or you just want to talk about your career. It doesn't matter. It's open. Okay. Whatever's on your mind.
Okay. What did you enjoy the most yourself? You're teachable, you're open. What did you enjoy the most last year and as we've done the conference, and what would you say you're looking forward to the most, or you hope to get out of the conference and the opportunity that it'll present here in a few weeks?
Was last year when we had this friend of Renee's who was a screenwriter.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Ultimate Gift. Is that right?
Cheryl McKay blew me away last year in her keynote. She wrote the movie, The Ultimate Gift, the screenplay, and I think Renee did the novelization.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
Her keynote last year moved me so much that I walked out of the building thinking I'll never be the same again. And you love it when you have an experience like that.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't anticipating that either. And I'll say, let me grab a drink. The opportunity to not only write for traditional publications, write for books, but writing for film, the screenplay side. I mean, Renee's story, we heard part of it our last webinar. I mean, what an incredible opportunity to reach an audience and to think about that potential. My daughter, who's 12, I mean, I've told her about Renee and this story, and this is, she's explained how that's for 20 years. I mean, this has been her dream, but I was really touched by that as well. And I was not expecting the depth of, it wasn't just about, here's how you do it, here's, how to be successful. I mean,
she was giving us the story on how she wrote the movie with her inner journey as well.
Oh yeah, she was. And multiple authors are, because many times it's that inner journey that is the passion.
Yes.
Like when someone shares their inner journey, they're sharing their passion and a lot about their identity and why they're doing what they're doing. And yeah, she was impactful.
But I will say this, I have attended many conferences. And for you to hear the quality of national speakers, like we have one of the top agents in the nation coming, and James Scott Bell, our keynote speaker, is on the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, these are the type of people, if you left Oklahoma to travel to go hear them, you will be spending at least $2,000. I know this from experience. And so somebody asked me the other day, do you think people even know what you're giving them? And I said, the new people don't. But the people that have been around and spending money to fly to California and sit in, big audiences to try to hear some of this, they have an idea of what we're trying to bring to Oklahoma, what we are bringing to Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. Have and are.
At almost no cost to you. It's very little.
And maybe this is where we should end it, is we want to encourage you to share Write Well, Sell Well, to not only come to the conference, but to share. The idea of doing these webinars is multifold. I mean, one of them was just like we have tonight, have an opportunity to learn from Melanie and have a chance for her to share. But we want to amplify the conference. We want to amplify the opportunity. So please take the link to this video on YouTube, share it on your Facebook. If you're on Twitter, other social media, let other people know. This conference is about equipping. It's about networking. And it's also about being inspired.
It is.
I know we'll be inspired again, and I'm getting fired up about it. Just thinking about last year and wondering what's gonna come this year, because I know it's gonna be great. It's phenomenal. Because look who's organized the conference. These awesome writers and authors who are passionate and have had so much experience and want to share that experience and passion to the next generation to pay it forward.
Well, do we have time for me to say something again?
We have all the
Okay.
time we want. No one is going to tell us to stop.
Okay, well, here's the thing I want to say again. The fact that you're taking your time to invest into learning the craft by watching this webinar means that you are exactly what this industry needs. There's editors out there desperate for people like you who are willing to be teachable, who are willing to work at their craft. I mean, you could be out playing miniature golf. You could be watching your favorite movie. You could be watching television right now. But the fact that you're taking your time on this webinar tells me you're going to make it. You're already going to the top of the list.
All right. So with that thought, please visit our website, Write Well, Sell Well OKC. We hope to see you in October. And we hope that you'll help us share the conference and bring these opportunities to more writers and just, build the community and provide more opportunities for the networking, for the growth, and for the success. Thanks for joining us. And thank you.
You're welcome.